On November 27, 1940 in New York, a husband and wife had dinner at the Store Club. A photographer asked them if they would mind having a photo taken of them. The man replied, "Not at all, but it's the last picture you'll take of us, because tomorrow I'm going away for a long, long time." Both the wife and the photographer looked at the husband, puzzled. What on earth did he mean with that weird reply? The same man, some 50 years earlier, then a 15-year-old boy in Boston, earned his living by day trading. He got so good at it that the trading facilities in the city eventually had to bar him, as he was picking away their profits, trade by trade. At 30, in 1907, he earned $1 million in a single day, while Wall Street was in complete despair. He was asked by none other than J.P. Morgan himself to stop selling the market short. And both between and after this, he went complete broke a couple of times. This is the roller coaster life story of a true pioneer of stock market trading. He went by many names: the Boy Plunger, the Great Bear of Wall Street, the Lone Wolf of Wall Street. But if you knew him, he'd tell you, "Call me JL, Jesse Livermore." We will follow Livermore's journey from a century ago, starting out as a mere kid with a talent, who develops a trading system and eventually makes it into the big leagues. It's a story filled with joy and despair, accomplishments and mistakes, fortunes and bankruptcies, and quite a few wives and mistresses. Buckle up and accompany us on this grand tour. This is the Swedish Investor, bringing you the best tips and tools for reaching financial freedom through stock market investing. Chapter 1. Finding One's Passion. Jesse Livermore was born in 1877 and brought up in a rural area of Massachusetts, more or less in poverty. His father was a farmer and his mother was the housekeeper. Already at the age of 5, Livermore read the financial pages in the newspaper, and in school, he proved to have a keen mind for mathematics, as he studied it 3 times faster than his peers. However, at age 14, Livermore's father wanted him to quit his education and help him out full-time on the farm. Livermore did quit his education, but he didn't help out at the farm either. He ran away from home. With his talent for arithmetic, he soon found himself with his first job as a board boy in Boston at a firm called Payne Weber. Here, he wrote down stock quotes on a blackboard for all customers to see. The job exposed him to what he cherished the most: numbers. From all the numbers and quotations, he started seeing patterns in the movements. It wasn't long until he developed a system that he thought would help him anticipate the price fluctuations. This is where he was introduced to the bucket shops, establishments where you could bet on stocks without actually owning them. You could do this with a thin margin. Here is where Livermore began his relationship with Mrs. Leverage, which sadly would be the only relationship he could sustain his whole life. At an age of 15, and with the support of his trading system scratched down in his notebook, he bet on Burlington. 2 days later, he cashed out, having earned just over $3 on a $5 trade. This is where it all began, and from here on out, he was hooked. It wasn't long until Livermore earned more on his trading than what he received from the paycheck. With few responsibilities, and with nothing to lose, one can only imagine how easy the decision must have been for him to quit his 9-to-5 and to start trading full-time. The customers that the bucket shops were used to fleece weren't exactly calculating men. Most of them were outright gamblers. Livermore was different though, because of his level of effort and dedication. He didn't care about opinions, some favorite stock, or the why of the movements. He cared about one thing only: the price movements themselves. It was only after a few months of trading that Livermore showed his mother $1,000, which in today's worth would be something like $30,000. Apparently, his mother had a hard time even believing it was real money. One can only imagine how she went full-on mother mode on him.
"Jesse, what have you done? We didn't raise you to steal and cheat. Your father is right. We've been too soft on you."
While his mother was all hysterical about it, Livermore just wanted to carry on proving his system was working. That's all the fun there is. being right by using your head. The bucket shops were run more or less like a casino, and the casino always wins, right? Well, it didn't win against our boy Jesse. It actually got to the point where he wasn't welcome to the shops anymore. They started referring to him as the boy plunger, as he was willing to bet big on his positions. Being barred, Livermore still didn't want to stop trading. He developed schemes for being allowed to trade. When he arrived at new places, he sometimes began by losing on purpose. Only after a few losses would he start his actual trading, which made the managers hopeful that he had just been lucky. But that didn't last long for obvious reasons. He also started wearing disguises upon entering the establishments, and sometimes he sent in friends with instructions of what to buy and sell. None of these tactics worked for very long, and he was asked to not interfere with the owner's dividends. Simply put, Livermore had outgrown Boston and the bucket shops. Chapter 2. Learning from mistakes. It was time for the majors. Entering the vigorous city of New York and heading to Wall Street must have been an exciting phase for Livermore. Being in his early 20s, a few $1,000s in his pocket, and with a trading system he could trust. He arrived in the city in the morning, and before 1 o'clock the very same day, he had opened an account with a broker and started to trade. This would be like the bucket shops once again, but without any upper limit. However, something must have been up, because Livermore started to lose money. Around this time, Livermore met a young and pretty brunette named Nettie Jordan, and being the boy plunger, he married her after only a few weeks of dating. Even though he lost money trading in this first phase in New York, he continued playing the game. In order to keep speculating, he asked his newly wedded wife to pawn the collection of jewelry he had gotten for her. They separated shortly thereafter. Livermore didn't arrive at the root cause for his failed trading until he was totally wiped out. He wasn't mad. Livermore realized that getting mad at the market was like a gambler who was getting mad at a deck of cards. What difference would it make? What had seemed like the old machinery turned out to have some distinct differences from what Livermore was used to. For one thing, the tape that he was basing his trades on could sometimes lag up to an hour behind the real-time prices. His trades were executed much more slowly here than in the bucket shops, meaning that he sometimes wouldn't get the price he thought he would. Another one of Livermore's problems was that he tried to be active all the time. When he didn't get any signals from his system, he would get kind of bored and went in gambling instead. His third problem was that he loved to secure his profits, much like the rest of Wall Street at the time. Meanwhile, he often added to his losing positions to average down. Peter Lynch would have told him, "Selling your winners and holding your losers is like cutting the flowers and watering the weeds." Livermore borrowed some money from an acquaintance and went to a few bucket shops, where he knew his system worked. He went to St. Louis where he wasn't recognized, but word spread quickly, and he would soon find himself barred in this city too. However, he collected a decent bankroll and was ready for round 2 against Wall Street. He would get wiped out a second time in the 1901 stock market panic, but hey, the third time is the charm. Livermore had been on top of the Dunning-Kruger curve only to drop like a rock. After some initial success in an endeavor, people tend to overestimate their ability. Only after getting burned do we realize that we need to up our game. And Livermore was no different. However, he did learn from his mistakes. From now on, he would no longer be focusing on day trading, as that seemed too difficult outside the bucket shops. Instead, he would focus on larger, long-term movements as a swing trader. He would wait patiently by the sidelines whenever there were no favorable bets to do according to his system. And finally, he would cut his losses short and let his profits run. Instead of hoping that a falling stock will return, Livermore recognized, one must fear that the stock may fall even further. A position that moved against him, he took as an indication that he might be wrong in his analysis. Better to step out and analyze the situation again. "Markets are never wrong. Opinions often are," he would say. Chapter 3. King for a Day. Livermore had found his rhythm again. He was now beating the market even in the big leagues of Wall Street. Although he wasn't increasing the size of his portfolio very fast, partly due to quite a busy private life. The more he made, the more he spent. Livermore was a member of quite a few elite clubs around Wall Street and Manhattan, and he had gotten somewhat of a sweet tooth for both luxury and ladies. Quick side tour. Even though Livermore isn't a great role model in all regards, there is perhaps a lesson for some of us here. While we try our best to be frugal, living on oatmeal and water, in order to get that snowball rolling, the years go by. Make sure to not deprive yourself of all the things that make you happy, just so that you can be happy 10, 20 or 30 years from now. Apply Jeff Bezos' regret minimization framework. Imagine yourself on your deathbed way down the road. What decision are you less likely to regret by then? Choose that one. Livermore was very fond of fishing, and in 1906 he went down to his favorite vacation spot, Palm Beach in Florida, to cool his nerves. He had been unsure of the market's direction, and as his now famous saying goes, "There's time to go long, time to go short, and time to go fishing." While walking on the beach with a friend, he felt a sudden desire to short Union Pacific, one of the leading stocks of the bull market. His friend told him that he was crazy, and that he himself was long the very same stock, as were everybody else too. Just a few days later, the news reported of the devastating earthquake of San Francisco, with the death tolls in the thousands and a lot of sacked infrastructure. This was bad news also for Union Pacific. What had started out as a vacation trade on a mere hunch had made Jesse his biggest winning yet, $250,000. Soon thereafter, a period of 3 weeks, now referred to as the 1907 Bankers' Panic, took place. After a failed attempt to corner the stock of the United Copper Company, many banks fell into financial difficulties. Depositors started to withdraw their money en masse, as they feared that the banks wouldn't be able to repay them. This of course just added fuel to the fire. A panic broke out and the market fell massively. Livermore went short, as he, early on, had picked up on the fear that was spreading. In a single day, on October 24, 1907, he made more than $1 million. He was king that day. While Livermore was king, Wall Street was in despair. JP Morgan, together with a few other bankers, had to step up as the lender of last resort to save the market. Together, they helped create the liquidity that the market needed to calm down. Even John D. Rockefeller participated in this. Yet, there was still a lack of buyers of stocks. JP Morgan asked Livermore and a few other traders who swung heavy lines to stop hammering on the market with their short selling. Livermore, as most men during this time, idolized Morgan and was convinced that with all this money, he shouldn't risk a total societal crash. Livermore switched to buying. This new money enabled Livermore to purchase an extravagant apartment on Upper West Side and a great yacht, which he took for the occasional long travels across the ocean to Paris and when he went fishing in Florida. Chapter 4. The Roller Coaster. Well, you know the saying, easy come, easy go. Not that it necessarily had been very easy for Livermore to acquire his 1908 fortune of a few $1,000,000, it had required both an adequate analysis and the courage to take deep plunges. But it surely seems like the easy go part holds true. Livermore had gotten to know the experienced cotton investor Percy Thomas, who, along with Livermore, bought a lot of cotton. Livermore wasn't quite sure of the position, but hey, Thomas was the pro in this domain. This was Livermore's first mistake in the domino process of failures that once again would leave him broke. He was playing somebody else's game. But it didn't stop there. Instead of cutting the losses early on, Livermore did what he learned a few years back he never ought to do. He added to his bleeding position. Well, eventually cotton broke even further, and Livermore ended up losing more than 90% of his fortune. Some people who knew Percy Thomas had sympathy with Livermore. Ah, that bloody Thomas, he's so convincing. He could sell ice cubes to Eskimos. Livermore was now convinced more than ever that he had to stick to his own decisions only. He had to be the lone wolf of Wall Street. After this incident, he developed a rule that went something like this. If you know something about the markets, something really, really important, please keep it to yourself. Having lost all that money, Livermore wanted it back. Quickly. I guess most of us can relate to the feeling of, I had it, I earned it, now I want it back. But Livermore was an emotional wreck at this point. He started to show signs of depression. It might have been the first time he was feeling these dark thoughts, but it would certainly not be the last, as you soon shall see. Combined with the imaginary hurry he was in, this led him to quite a few outright gambles, instead of well-calculated trades and sticking to his system. All this ended in personal bankruptcy by 1915, with over $1 million in debt. Livermore didn't know it at that time, of course, but Warren Buffett would say,
why do people, very bright people, risk losing something that's very important to them to gain something that's totally unimportant? The added money has no utility whatsoever. The gain-loss ratio in any real sense is just incredible. You only have to get rich once.
When Livermore did some introspection later, he realized that it was the success that got to him, his ego. When he made $1 million in a single day and the great JP Morgan asked him for a personal favor, he was king. Now, he had fallen like a burning star. But still being a star, Livermore had earned quite the reputation during the 2007 crash. He was able to borrow some money to get back on his feet. This time he waited a full 6 weeks before doing any trade at all. He had to be right. And in 1915, when he bought Bethlehem Steel with his trademark amount of leverage, he was. Steel prices were rising because of the increased demand from World War I, and Livermore was back in black. A couple of years later, in 1917, he paid off his creditors and went on and accumulated his largest fortune as of yet. Quite a lot of money, but nothing compared to what was about to come. Chapter 5. The $100 Million Man. By 1918, US President Woodrow Wilson was engaged in peace talks regarding World War I. Livermore was sure that a positive outcome would lead to higher demand in cotton and higher prices as a result. So he did the only thing sensible. He tried to corner the cotton market. As he was succeeding in getting control, President Wilson called Livermore to the White House. The president convinced Livermore to sell his cotton at break-even, and to the question as to why Livermore had done what he did, he answered, "To see if I could, Mr. President." Also in 1918, Livermore married a beautiful dance girl of the Ziegfeld Follies. Her name was Dorothy Went, and she was 18 and he was 41. In 1919, she gave birth to Livermore's first son, Jesse Jr. The family moved in together in an awesomely expensive house in Kings Point on Long Island. The house had 29 rooms and 12 bathrooms, and probably looked something similar to this one. This happens to be the area that was Fitzgerald's inspiration for The Great Gatsby. Livermore gave Dorothy a blank check for her to spend whatever amount she deemed necessary to furnish the place. Every morning, Livermore boarded his 300-foot yacht that was anchored by his shoreline as the captain set sail for Manhattan and Wall Street. Quite some way to commute, eh? Dorothy was a lively spirit, kind of the opposite of Livermore. She hosted many parties in their new luxurious home, and Livermore got to know many powerful businessmen and many beautiful women. Too bad for Dorothy, Livermore had a great passion for beautiful women, and this would lead to trouble down the line. But first, the greatest success of Livermore's financial life. In the 1920s, a new crop of suckers had arrived at the stock market scene. A set of people who had never experienced, for example, the bankers' panic of 1907. Therefore, they thought that the market could only move in 3 directions: up, up, and up. Connor, the cab driver, said that, "When I extrapolate my last 4 months' return of 28%, I should only have to work for another 3 or 4 years." The fictive Connor didn't care much that stocks were now selling at 30, 40, 50, or even 60 times their annual earnings. and these were the companies that used to sell for 10 times earnings. Livermore had now moved into a fancy office on 735th Avenue, the Heckscher building. He had 6 board boys whom he employed personally that wrote down quotes for him, and he had over 50 brokers, so no one could tell what his trades were. Correctly, Livermore figured that the current excesses would come crashing down. So, in 1929, he began his shorting. He made a list of the leading securities that he thought were in for trouble and began sending out his probes. These were smaller positions to test the market, to test the validity of his ideas before really committing. He lost $250,000 quickly. Then he sent out another round of probes and lost again. But the third time, he hit the jackpot. In the days leading up to Black Tuesday in October 1929, Livermore and his staff were sleeping in the office because of the high activity. The plunge was massive and sparked the beginning of the Great Depression and the worst period in stock market history. Havoc and panic spread, and there were rumors of ruined investors taking their own lives and traders who lost everything. Connor the cab driver's savings had evaporated, and instead of retiring in 3 years, he was now happy to receive any customers at all, as that meant not starving on the street. When Livermore came home that evening, Dorothy was in panic. She had started packing their belongings, believing they too had lost everything. She had gotten used to the extravagant lifestyle and didn't look forward to ordinary life. Maybe the conversation went something like this.
I'm so sorry, love. I've heard what happened today. Oh, it's terrible. Rita's husband jumped out. He jumped out a window. Me and the boys have been packing our stuff all day. What should we do now? JL, what should we do?
Packing? Darling, I shorted the markets. We're one of the richest families in America. $100 million. Here's where I personally hoped that the story would end, but unfortunately it doesn't. Livermore was about to explore the lowest lows on the roller coaster that was his life. Chapter 6. Endgame. Imagine being in Livermore's golden shoes. Being ultra-rich, doing what you love, having a young and attractive wife, taking your yacht to work, being respected by peers, etc. Considering that the richest person of that decade, John D. Rockefeller, was sitting at around $1 billion, Livermore must have been one of the richest persons in America. Kind of a perfect setup for happiness, right? As it turns out, all was not well. Livermore was having affairs, some of them with Dorothy's former colleague dancers of the Ziegfeld Follies. Dorothy was drinking heavily as a result. She even had an affair of her own as sort of a revenge. The whole thing came crashing down when in 1932, Dorothy had finally had enough, and she filed for divorce. Allegedly, she instantly remarried and would sometimes brag that she was single for no more than 20 minutes. In Livermore's mind, dark clouds were always lurking on the horizon, but after losing the lively Dorothy, these clouds completely encapsulated him. All was not well with their 2 boys either. Dorothy gained custody after the divorce, but the boys had been to so many boarding schools and summer camps that it had affected their relationship to their parents, who were rarely there for them. Jesse Jr., the oldest, was a drinking playboy already by the age of 14. On Thanksgiving Day 1935, he and his mother had an argument. She said something about rather seeing him dead than turn into an alcoholic. Jesse Jr. decided to challenge this statement by putting a gun in her hand, not believing she could do it. The gun went off. It seemed to be somewhat of an accident, as Dorothy received no legal punishment for the incident. However, Jesse Jr. was hurt badly, and Livermore himself sank deeper into depression when he realized what his life had led to. His ex-wife shot her own son? It was a Greek tragedy, and Livermore was the main character. The perfect storm was not over yet. Livermore would remarry with a woman named Harriet, but Harriet was not the perfect match that Dorothy had been. Allegedly, Harriet's previous husband had committed suicide. Livermore's boys moved in with the newlywed after Dorothy lost custody due to the shooting, and they really couldn't stand their new mom. They called her the bitch witch due to her mood and ways. She was very possessive. The final nail in the coffin was that Livermore's trading skills were deteriorating. Many blamed the Great Bear of Wall Street for the 1929 crash, and Livermore received multiple death threats. Perhaps it was a consequence of his now tragic personal life, but the attention wasn't there, the energy wasn't there, even the passion wasn't there anymore. It remains a mystery to this day what happened, but on March 5th, 1934, Livermore filed for bankruptcy for the second time. One could imagine him rising like a phoenix from the ashes once again, but this time he just wasn't up for the task. In 1939, in his early 60s, he gathered all his strength to put his trading knowledge down in a book. It was released in 1940 and called How to Trade in Stocks. This shows that Livermore cared about his fellow investors. In doing so, he has helped many traders to stand on the shoulders of giants, allowing them to see a little bit further. That he finally decided to immortalize his knowledge may have foreshadowed what was about to happen next. On November 27, 1940, in New York, Livermore and Harriet had dinner at the Store Club. A photographer asked them if they would mind having a photo taken of them. Livermore replied, "Not at all, but it's the last picture you'll take of us, because tomorrow I'm going away for a long, long time." Both Harriet and the photographer looked at Livermore, puzzled. What on earth did he mean with that weird reply? The next day, November 28th, Livermore went by himself to the Sherry Netherland Hotel. Later, he was found shot dead in a cloakroom. In his pocket, he had an 8-page-long farewell letter for Harriet. It remains a debate whether Livermore was one of the greatest traders of all time or whether he was mostly lost potential. Starting with the $1,000 that he showed his mother as a young boy of 15 and ending up with the claimed $100 million he made in the 1929 crash, his annual return would be some 36% per year. That number certainly earns him a spot among the greatest. However, given that he then lost his fortune, I think it's a tough call. Livermore played around with tons of borrowed money, and this was both his blessing and curse. He probably wouldn't have reached stardom without it, but most likely he could have gotten really, really rich. More importantly, he would never have lost his fortune after making it the first time. Now, I know this channel isn't called The Swedish Trader, but I think that there is some general advice both for long-term value investors and traders in the story about Jesse Livermore. To me, it's a lesson about what true dedication and focus can do for you, about learning and improving your investing process after facing difficulties, about making a comeback, and a constant reminder that one must strike a balance between career and personal life to achieve true happiness. If you wish to learn about someone who made his fortune and never looked back, check out this video about how Tom made his first $1 million. Cheers, guys!